What happens when a wildlife conservationist steps onto a talk show expecting a lighthearted chat about animals, only to find themselves in the middle of a full-blown debate? That's exactly what happened when Robert Irwin, son of the legendary Steve Irwin, appeared on The View. He thought he'd be sharing updates about his latest conservation projects, but Joy Behar had a very different agenda. A conversation that began with crocodiles quickly escalated into one of the most tense moments in daytime TV history. So intense that security had to intervene by the end. Before we dive into the chaos that unfolded, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me whose side you're on. Because trust me, this is going to stir up some opinions. Robert walked onto the set with the trademark Irwin energy. Bright-eyed, enthusiastic, ready to talk wildlife. The audience cheered as he waved and took his seat. The first few minutes were textbook Irwin magic. Whoopi Goldberg asked about his recent research trip to Northern Australia, and Robert lit up describing the massive saltwater crocodiles they'd tagged, some stretching nearly 20 feet long. You could see his passion, a spark inherited from his father, radiating through the screen. The audience was captivated, smiling and nodding along. Then Joy Behar interjected, "Robert, that's all very interesting, but don't you think we might be focusing too much on crocodiles when people are suffering?" The energy in the studio shifted immediately. Robert's smile remained, but his expression tightened slightly. He took a calm breath and responded, "Joy, conservation isn't a choice between animals and people. Healthy ecosystems are critical for human life. By protecting wildlife habitats, we're also safeguarding the resources communities depend on." But Joy wasn't satisfied. "Sure, but what about homeless veterans or children going hungry? Meanwhile, we're tagging crocodiles. How does that make sense?" The other hosts exchanged quick glances. Sunny Host looked uneasy. Sarah Haynes tried to gauge the room, and Whoopi maintained her neutral, watchful stance. Robert leaned forward, his voice steady but passionate. "That's a false dichotomy. My family's organization employs hundreds, supports local economies, and funds educational programs. Conservation isn't a luxury, it's essential. Thinking that caring for wildlife means ignoring people is exactly how we've ended up in the environmental crisis we're facing." The audience reacted audibly, a collective gasp filling the room at his bold statement. Joy countered, her tone challenging. "Robert, you're young, and I mean no offense, but some of us have been hearing about environmental crises for decades. Acid rain, the ozone disappearing, warnings that Florida would be underwater by now. How do we know some of this isn't exaggerated?" Robert's jaw tightened. The ozone layer recovered because decisive action was taken. That proves environmental policy works. It's not exaggeration. And sea level rise? That's happening now. Communities in the Pacific are being displaced. Miami experiences flooding during high tide. These aren't opinions, they're measurable facts. Joy cut in, trying to minimize the concern. "Miami's always flooded. I've been going there for 40 years. Robert's voice grew firmer, carrying authority. "The frequency and severity of tidal flooding in Miami has increased dramatically. This isn't a matter of perception, it's documented data." Whoopi tried to steer the conversation back, but Joy pressed on, her point hitting a nerve. "Your generation has been told the sky's falling your entire lives. It's sad that young people are terrified about climate instead of enjoying their youth." At that moment, Robert's composure began to crack. Terrified. That single word hung in the air, a spark that ignited the tension further. The clash between passionate advocacy and skeptical challenge had escalated into a moment viewers wouldn't soon forget. "We're not terrified," Robert said, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "We're informed, and honestly, it's attitudes like yours, this dismissiveness, this refusal to accept scientific consensus, that have made the problem so much worse. My generation is inheriting a planet degraded by decades of inaction, and now we're being patronized for actually trying to fix it." The studio went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Sarah Haynes attempted to pivot the conversation. Robert, tell us about the new exhibit at Australia Zoo. But Joy interrupted sharply. No, let him finish. He clearly has thoughts about my attitude. Robert looked directly at her. I'm not attacking you personally, Joy. I'm criticizing a mindset, the mindset that insists we can't care about multiple things at once, that treats environmental science as debatable, that dismisses young people who are actually going to live in the world we're creating right now. Joy's face flushed. Robert, I've been on television for 30 years. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel Prize winners. I don't need a lecture from someone who grew up on a television show. That was the spark. The gloves were off. Robert's face turned pale, then red. His hands gripped the armrests. That's incredibly disrespectful, Joy. My father dedicated his life to conservation and education. He died doing what he loved. And yes, our work was documented on television, but that doesn't make it any less legitimate. Would you say the same thing to Jane Goodall, to David Attenborough? Joy waved her hand dismissively. Those are scientists, Robert. You're a celebrity. I have a degree in conservation biology, Robert shot back, his voice trembling. Not with fear, but with pure frustration. I've published research. I work directly with endangered species recovery programs. What exactly makes my credentials less valid than anyone else's? Whoopi tried again to intervene. All right, let's take a breath here. But Joy pressed on, relentless. Your credentials are fine, Robert. I'm sure you're very smart. What bothers me is this self-righteousness, this moral superiority. Your generation comes on shows like this and lectures everyone about how terrible we've been, how we've ruined everything. Quite frankly, it's exhausting. Robert let out a short, incredulous laugh. Not a happy one, but the kind you make when you can't believe what you're hearing. Self-righteous, Joy? You built a career on telling people when they're wrong. How is me defending conservation science any different from what you do every day on this show? The audience reacted in shock. Gasps, scattered applause, and wide-eyed disbelief. Sunny Host looked stunned. Sarah Haynes seemed like she wanted to disappear, and Alyssa Farah Griffin watched the entire scene like a slow-motion car crash. Joy pointed her finger at Robert. The difference is I've earned the right to my strong opinions. I've lived through wars, recessions, social movements. You've lived through, what, Instagram? Robert didn't hesitate. I've lived through the 6th mass extinction. I've watched species disappear. I've seen coral reefs die with my own eyes. I've held animals in my hands that are the last of their kind. So, forgive me if I think that gives me the right to speak strongly about conservation. Joy shook her head. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Everything's a crisis. Everything's the end of the world. When I was growing up, people like you were called alarmists. Robert's voice rose. And now we call people like you deniers. We call them obstacles. We call them part of the problem. The studio erupted. Some audience members clapped, some booed, and some just sat frozen, mouths open. Whoopi stood, trying to regain control. Okay, we need to stop right now. But neither Joy nor Robert were backing down. Joy stood. I am not a denier, Robert. I believe in climate change. What I don't believe in is being told I should feel guilty for living my life, for traveling, for enjoying things. By someone who has made millions off animals. Made millions. Robert rose, voice firm and commanding. Every dollar our organization makes goes straight back into conservation. My family lives modestly. We don't own private jets or multiple mansions. We spend our money saving habitats and funding research. What do you spend your money on, Joy? That question hung in the air like a bomb. Joy's face turned red. How dare you question how I spend my money? You don't know anything about my life, what I do with my resources? You're right, I don't, Robert said, his voice calmer but sharper than before. But I know you fly to your vacation home regularly. I know you've opposed wind farms because they might spoil your view. I know you've mocked young climate activists on this very show. So forgive me for questioning whether you genuinely care about any of this, or if you just like arguing. Sunny Host tried to intervene. Robert, maybe we should... No, let him talk, Joy interrupted, pointing at him. Let him tell us all how terrible I am. Let him explain how his generation has it all figured out while the rest of us are selfish or stupid. Robert took a deep breath. I never said you were stupid, Joy. I said your attitude is part of the problem. When someone with your platform dismisses environmental science, when you mock young people for caring about the future, you're actively making it harder to solve these issues. You have influence whether you acknowledge it or not. And right now, you're using that influence to spread apathy. Joy's voice rose with incredulity. I care about plenty of things. Healthcare, education, human rights. Just because I don't prioritize your pet project doesn't mean I'm apathetic. It's not a pet project, Robert countered, animated now, gesturing emphatically. It's the foundation of everything else. You can't have healthcare without clean water. You can't have education without a stable climate. You can't have human rights when people are being displaced by environmental disasters. Everything connects. And the fact that you don't see that, it's terrifying because you're smart enough to understand it, which means you're choosing not to. Joy slammed her notes onto the table. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who thinks spending time with koalas makes him morally superior. I don't have to be condescended to by someone who thinks age equals wisdom. Robert's voice rang out, strong and unwavering. Some of the most ignorant, short-sighted, destructive decisions in human history have been made by old people who thought they knew better. The audience gasped. Whoopi raised her voice. All right, that's enough. We're going to commercial. But Joy wasn't done. Get him off my stage. I'm serious. Get him out of here. Robert let out that bitter, incredulous laugh again. Your stage? It's not your stage, Joy. You're one host on a panel show. You don't own this. Off camera, producers scrambled. 2 security guards started approaching the stage, looking confused. Who were they supposed to escort? Meanwhile, the audience was on its feet, some filming, some frozen in disbelief. Sunny stepped toward Joy. Maybe we should all just take a beat. Joy shrugged him off. No, I'm done. I'm done with this interview. He can leave or I can leave. But we're not continuing. Robert faced Whoopi. I came here to talk about conservation. I came in good faith to discuss the work we're doing to save endangered species. Instead, I got ambushed with dismissive questions and personal attacks. If anyone should leave, it should be the person who turned this into an argument. Whoopi raised both hands. Nobody's leaving. We're all adults here. We can disagree without this turning into whatever this has become. Can we, though? Robert asked quietly but intensely. Because every time someone from my generation talks about climate or conservation, we get the same response. We're too young, too emotional, too alarmist. At what point does our expertise matter? At what point do we get to have a seat at the table without being dismissed? Joy crossed her arms. You have a seat at the table, Robert. You're on national television. You have millions of followers and resources most people could only dream of. What you don't have is the right to tell people who've been working on these issues longer than you've been alive that they don't care enough. Then prove you care, Robert said, his voice firm. Stop mocking climate activists. Stop dismissing scientific consensus. Stop prioritizing your comfort over the planet's future. If you actually care, act like it. Sarah finally spoke, her voice shaky. Maybe we can find some common ground. You both clearly care about important issues, you just have different priorities and approaches. No, Robert said firmly. We don't have different priorities. One person prioritizes evidence and action. The other prioritizes contrarianism and ratings. This isn't a both sides situation, Sarah. Climate science isn't up for debate. Conservation biology isn't a matter of opinion. These are facts. and I'm tired of pretending that skepticism and denial deserve equal airtime with reality. Joy uncrossed her arms and stepped closer. You want to talk about reality? Here's reality. Most people watching this show are worried about paying bills, not crocodile populations. Most can't afford electric cars or solar panels. Most are just trying to survive. And you standing here acting like they're part of the problem? That's elitist, and it's offensive. Robert didn't flinch. I never said ordinary people are the problem. The problem is systemic. Fossil fuel companies funding climate denial, politicians taking money from polluters, media personalities amplifying false narratives. Individuals are doing the best they can, but the system needs to change, and that starts with people like you using your platform responsibly. Responsibly. Joy repeated the word, skeptical. You mean agreeing with you? No, Robert said firmly. I mean not spreading misinformation. I mean not giving credibility to arguments that have been scientifically debunked. I mean acknowledging that when 99% of climate scientists agree, maybe the 1% funded by oil companies isn't the side we should be amplifying. Whoopi tried once more to intervene. Okay, I think we've heard both perspectives. Viewers can make up their own minds. No, Joy interrupted, pointing at Robert. If you feel so strongly, if you think I'm so terrible with dangerous views, why did you agree to come on the show? You knew who I was. You knew what this show is. So why come here just to insult me? Robert paused, genuinely thoughtful for the first time in minutes. I didn't come to insult you. I came hoping for a real conversation. I thought that maybe, if I explained the work we're doing and why it matters, it might resonate. I came with optimism, which maybe was naive, but I thought it was worth trying. And honestly, even now, I think you're capable of understanding why this matters. I just think you're choosing not to, and that frustrates me. Joy's expression softened slightly. You think I'm choosing ignorance? No, Robert said. I think you're choosing comfort. Acknowledging the scale of this crisis means accepting changes, some of which might be inconvenient. Comfort isn't more important than survival. The security guards remained awkwardly near the stage. Producers signaled frantically. Whoopi looked exhausted. Joy picked up her coffee, took a long sip, and looked Robert squarely in the eyes. I'm 70 years old, Robert. I've lived a full life. I fought battles you can't imagine. I've advocated for causes that were unpopular and difficult. And now you're telling me I'm choosing comfort over survival? The difference isn't that I care less. It's that you think caring about the environment makes you better than people who prioritize other issues. I don't think I'm better than anyone, Robert said, his voice cracking slightly. I think we're running out of time. We're in the middle of a crisis that will affect everything, everyone, everywhere. And people with platforms have a responsibility to take that seriously. That's all I've been trying to say. Joy nodded slowly. And I think young people have been convinced the world is ending and it's making them miserable. Someone needs to push back on that narrative. That's all I've been trying to say. For a brief moment, they stood staring at each other. It seemed like they might have reached some understanding, or at least a stalemate. Then Joy turned to the producers. I'm taking a break. We can finish without me. She walked off the stage, still holding her coffee mug. The security guards looked to Whoopi, who waved them off. We're good. Thank you. Robert remained facing the remaining hosts and a stunned audience. Alyssa cleared her throat. Well, that was certainly illuminating. Whoopi looked at him. You've definitely made this a memorable appearance. Robert ran a hand through his hair. I didn't mean for it to go like that. I just couldn't sit there and let those arguments go unchallenged. Clearly, Sonny said with a small smile. For what it's worth, I think you made some valid points. Valid points don't matter if they don't change minds, Robert said quietly. Whoopi extended her hand. Sometimes planting seeds is enough. People are listening, even if it doesn't feel like it. Robert shook her hand but looked defeated. The passion that had carried him earlier had drained, replaced by exhaustion. Cameras still rolled as he walked off the stage, past the crew, past producers already on their phones, probably doing damage control. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. A few clapped hesitantly. And that's how one of the most explosive interviews in daytime television history ended. Not with resolution, but with exhaustion. Two people, both convinced they were right, walked away unchanged. If you made it this far, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment. Who do you think handled that interview better, Robert or Joy? Let me know your thoughts.